Claire Dawson's grandmother used to say that the people who changed a life rarely arrived through the front door. They appeared where they were least expected, carrying storms behind their eyes. For years, Claire had never understood what those words meant. Then came the night she found a stranger behind her restaurant. Rain had been falling for hours, drumming against the windows of Dawson's Grill with the steady rhythm of a tired heartbeat. It was nearly midnight, and 27-year-old Claire Dawson was finishing the last of her cleanup after another long Thursday. The small family restaurant was not glamorous. The booths were worn, the neon sign flickered whenever the weather turned bad, but it was hers. Every paycheck, every sleepless night, and every dollar she managed to save had gone into keeping the place alive after losing her parents. She wiped down the final table and glanced through the front window. Main Street sat empty beneath the storm. Reflections shimmered across the wet pavement while the rain chased the last traces of activity from town. Normally, Claire liked nights like this. The quiet made the world feel smaller, safer. Yet something about that evening felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if the storm carried more than rain. She switched off the dining room lights, grabbed her jacket and headed toward the back exit. The moment she stepped outside, cold rain sprayed across her face. Pulling her hood over her head, she started toward the dumpster area behind the building. The alley smelled of wet asphalt and coffee grounds from the cafe next door. A security light buzzed overhead, casting weak yellow shadows across the narrow space. Halfway to the dumpster, Claire heard something. Not a voice, not exactly. More like movement, a scrape she froze instantly. Living alone had taught her to trust instincts most people ignored. The sound came again, somewhere near the fence at the far end of the alley. For a brief moment, she considered turning around and locking herself inside. That would have been the sensible choice. Instead, she stepped forward. Slowly, rainwater splashed beneath her boots. The shadows shifted beneath the security light. Then she saw him. A man sat slumped against the fence behind a stack of delivery crates. At first glance, Claire assumed he might be homeless. A few people occasionally sheltered behind local businesses during bad weather, but the closer she moved, the more obvious it became that this was something entirely different. Even soaked by rain, the dark coat looked tailored. A watch on his wrist caught the light. Everything about him suggested wealth. Yet there he was, sitting alone in an alley behind a small-town restaurant. His head rested against the fence. His eyes were closed. Water streamed through his dark hair. For one frightening second, Claire wondered if he was even breathing. "Hey," she called cautiously. "Can you hear me?" No response. Her pulse quickened. She took another step. "Sir?" His eyes opened instantly, alert, sharp, the kind of eyes that suggested he had been awake the entire time. Green, strikingly green. Even in the darkness and rain, they seemed impossible to ignore. Claire stopped walking. Something about him triggered every warning instinct she possessed. Not because he looked dangerous, because he looked like a man who had survived dangerous things. He stared at her without speaking. "You need help," Claire said. His jaw tightened slightly. "I am fine." Claire immediately knew he was anything but fine. "You are sitting behind a dumpster in a thunderstorm." A faint expression crossed his face. Almost amusement, almost. Temporary inconvenience. Under different circumstances, Claire might have laughed. Instead, she noticed how pale he looked beneath the rain, how exhausted, like someone who had not slept in days. "You should go to a hospital." "No," the answer came immediately. Firm, absolute. "Then call someone." Claire folded her arms. "Are you always this friendly?" For the first time, something resembling a smile appeared. Briefly, then vanished. Thunder rolled overhead. Rain intensified. Claire glanced toward the street. Whoever this man was, leaving him alone in the storm felt wrong. What she did not know was that the stranger had spent hours avoiding people who were desperately searching for him. Gabriel Romano had built his life on caution. Trust came rarely to him. Yet somehow, this stubborn restaurant owner was still standing there. "Look," Claire said, "I have a first aid kit inside, a dry place to sit, a cup of coffee, that is the offer." His gaze studied her carefully. Most people would have walked away by now. Perhaps they should have. Finally he looked away. "Why?" Claire blinked. "Why what? Why help me?" The question surprised her. Not because he asked it, because he sounded like someone who genuinely did not understand the answer. She shrugged. "Because it is raining." He stared at her for a long moment, then a quiet laugh escaped him. The sound seemed unfamiliar, like something he rarely allowed himself. "That is not much of a reason. It is enough." Silence settled between them. Rain tapped against metal dumpsters while its distant siren echoed through town. The stranger slowly pushed himself to his feet. For a moment he swayed before catching his balance. He was tall, at least 6'2", broad shoulders, strong build. The kind of presence that filled a space without trying. Up close he looked even more exhausted than before. "Coffee?" Claire offered again. "Coffee," he agreed. Together they walked toward the back entrance of the restaurant. Claire held the door open. The stranger paused before stepping inside. His eyes swept across the alley behind them, watching, listening, searching, and suddenly Claire understood something important. He was not worried about the storm. He was worried about being found. A chill crawled down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. The stranger stepped into Dawson's grill and closed the door behind him. Outside, thunder shook the night. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives had just divided into 2 chapters. Everything before that moment, and everything that would come after. The smell of fresh coffee filled the empty restaurant as Claire Dawson locked the back door and turned the deadbolt. Rain continued rattling against the windows, transforming the glass into shimmering sheets of silver. The stranger stood near the entrance, leaving small puddles on the floor beneath his soaked coat. Up close, he looked even more worn than he had outside. Not weak, not helpless, simply exhausted in a way that seemed deeper than a lack of sleep. Claire pointed toward one of the booths near the kitchen. "Sit down before you fall down." A faint smile appeared on his face. "You always order people around this much?" "Only the ones I find in alleys." He lowered himself into the booth and glanced around the restaurant. His eyes moved carefully over every detail: the menu board, the front windows, the emergency exit, the kitchen door. It was the kind of observation that seemed automatic, as if he could not stop himself from assessing every room he entered. Claire disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a towel, a first aid kit, and the strongest coffee she could make. He accepted the towel first. "Thank you." The word sounded sincere. Unexpectedly sincere. Claire sat across from him and slid the coffee mug across the table. Steam curled upward between them. For a few moments neither spoke. Despite the storm outside, the restaurant felt strangely peaceful. Finally, Claire nodded toward his shoulder. "You should let me take a look." His expression hardened instantly, walls rising, defense returning. Whatever openness had existed moments earlier disappeared. "That is not necessary. You can barely keep your eyes open. I am fine." "That is the 3rd time you have said that." He looked down at the coffee. "Maybe I am trying to convince myself." A laugh escaped Claire before she could stop it. To her surprise, he seemed amused. The tension eased slightly. "I am not a doctor," she said. "But my father was a paramedic for 20 years. I learned enough growing up to know when someone needs help." His fingers tightened around the mug. "Your father sounds like a good man." He was. The past tense registered immediately. His expression softened. "I am sorry, thank you." Silence settled again. Rain tapped steadily against the roof, while the old refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. It felt strange talking to a man whose name she did not even know. "Do you have one?" Claire asked. He looked up. "A what?" "A name." Another pause followed. Then he answered, "Gabriel." The name fit him somehow. Strong, simple, memorable. "Claire," she said. "Nice to officially meet you." His eyes lingered on hers slightly longer than necessary. "Likewise, Claire." She opened the first aid kit and pushed it toward him. "Now let me help." This time he did not argue. Slowly Gabriel removed his coat and placed it beside him. Even then he seemed reluctant, careful, as though trust was something unfamiliar. Claire focused on practical tasks instead of questions. The less she knew, the safer she suspected she would be. "Do you have family nearby?" she asked while organizing supplies. "No." "Friends?" "Not the kind who sleep at normal hours." Claire shook her head. "That sounds lonely." Something unreadable crossed Gabriel's face. "It can be." For a brief moment he looked less like a mysterious stranger and more like an ordinary man carrying too much weight. Then headlights flashed across the front windows. Bright, sudden. Claire's stomach tightened. Gabriel reacted instantly. His head turned toward the glass before she had even fully processed what she had seen. Every muscle in his body became still. The atmosphere changed so quickly that Claire felt her own pulse begin to race. The vehicle slowed outside. Tires moved through standing water on the street. Gabriel stood, not panicked, not afraid, simply alert, intensely alert. He moved toward the front window without making a sound. Claire watched him pull the edge of the curtain aside by barely an inch. Seconds passed. Then another set of headlights appeared, and another. 3 vehicles now, all moving slowly down the street. Claire's pulse quickened. "Friends of yours?" she asked quietly. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "No." The answer came immediately. The vehicles continued past without stopping. Eventually their lights disappeared into the rain. Only then did Gabriel release the curtain. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, but not completely. He returned to the booth and sat down again. Claire, his voice sounded lower than before, more serious. If anyone comes here tonight asking questions, you did not see me. A chill slid down her spine. Who would be asking? His gaze shifted toward the window. People who are very determined. What exactly? You? And Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, not defensive, almost regretful. Nothing that should involve you. What Claire did not know was that Gabriel Romano had spent most of his adult life protecting people from problems exactly like this. The irony was not lost on him. Before she could respond, a sharp knock echoed from the back door. The sound cut through the restaurant like a crack of thunder. Both of them froze. Another knock followed, louder this time. Claire's heart immediately began hammering in her chest. Gabriel slowly stood from the booth. His eyes never left the hallway leading to the rear entrance. Outside, the storm continued raging. Inside, the restaurant suddenly felt very small, and for the first time all night, Claire realized that whoever had been following Gabriel might already know exactly where to look. The knock came again. 3 sharp taps against the back door. Not aggressive, not frantic. Somehow that made it worse. Claire Dawson looked toward the hallway. Gabriel remained perfectly still, the kind of stillness that did not come from calm, it came from control. The storm rattled the building around them while neither moved for several seconds. "Stay here," Claire whispered. Gabriel almost laughed. "I do not think that is how this works." Another knock echoed through the restaurant. Whoever stood outside clearly knew someone was inside. The kitchen lights were on. Claire's truck sat in the parking lot. Pretending the building was empty would fool no one. She swallowed hard and started toward the hallway. Gabriel's voice stopped her. She turned back. The concern in his eyes surprised her. "You do not have to open that door. And if it is a delivery driver stranded in the rain at 1 in the morning? He had a point. Claire hesitated. Then another thought occurred to her. If someone dangerous was looking for him, refusing to answer might create more suspicion than opening the door. At least if she answered, she controlled the conversation. "Trust me," she said. Gabriel's expression suggested he absolutely did not trust this plan. Still, he nodded once. Claire continued down the hallway while her heartbeat pounded louder with every step. The back entrance came into view. Rainwater streaked across the narrow window beside the door, making everything outside blurry and distorted. Rising onto her toes, she peeked through the glass. A man stood beneath a black umbrella, mid-40s, grey coat, clean-shaven. He looked more like an accountant than a threat, yet something about him felt unsettling. He stood too straight, too patient, like someone accustomed to being obeyed. Claire unlocked the door but kept the security chain secured. The opening was barely 3 inches wide. "Can I help you?" The man smiled politely. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry to disturb you so late." His voice was calm, professional. "I am looking for someone." Claire's stomach tightened. "This is a restaurant." "Yes." Dawson's Grill. His smile widened slightly. "You are Claire Dawson." The fact that he knew her name sent a chill through her. "Who is asking?" "A concerned friend." Behind her, Gabriel moved quietly somewhere deeper inside the building. The man outside glanced past her shoulder, though there was no way he could see much through the narrow opening. "We believe someone may have passed through this area tonight." "I would not know." "Of course." His tone remained pleasant. "Would you mind if I asked a few questions?" "Actually, I would." The smile never disappeared from his face, understandable. Thunder rolled overhead while rain drummed against the alley. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then his eyes settled on Claire with unexpected intensity. "If you happen to see a tall man with dark hair, tell him that old friends are looking for him." Something about the phrase "old friends" sounded carefully chosen, like a message, like a warning. What Claire did not know was that the man outside had already confirmed exactly what he came to learn. Gabriel Romano was somewhere nearby. "I will keep that in mind," Claire said. "Thank you." He tipped his umbrella slightly. "Have a good evening, Miss Dawson." Then he turned and walked away into the rain. Claire waited until he disappeared before closing the door and locking every bolt. Her hands trembled slightly. When she turned around, Gabriel stood at the end of the hallway watching her. "Who was he?" Claire asked. Gabriel looked toward the door. "Someone I hoped would not find me. That does not answer the question." "No, it does not." They returned to the dining room. The warm lighting suddenly felt less comforting than before. Outside, the storm continued swallowing the town. Gabriel sat down again, but his attention remained fixed on the windows. "Should I be worried?" Claire asked. His answer came immediately. Yes, she appreciated the honesty, even if she hated hearing it. Wonderful. A corner of Gabriel's mouth lifted. You are handling this better than most people would. Most people would have called the police 3 hours ago. Probably. Maybe I should have. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gabriel surprised her again. Why did you not? Claire stared into her coffee cup. The answer was simpler than she wanted it to be. Because you looked like someone who needed help. His gaze softened. That reason again. It is still enough. Something changed in Gabriel's expression. Not dramatically, just a small shift. As though a wall moved half an inch, the distance between stranger and friend shrinking ever so slightly. For years, Gabriel had learned to question motives. Kindness usually came with conditions. Claire Dawson was becoming increasingly difficult to explain. He leaned back in the booth and closed his eyes briefly. Exhaustion was finally winning ground against whatever determination had carried him this far. You should rest, Claire said quietly. I cannot. Why? His eyes opened. Because if I fall asleep, I might miss something important. Claire looked toward the rain-covered windows. And if you do not sleep, he considered that, then I will miss it anyway. For the first time all night, he looked genuinely tired. Not mysterious, not intimidating, just human. Claire stood and retrieved an old blanket from the storage closet. You are staying here for a few hours, Gabriel started to protest. Claire pointed toward the booth. That was not a suggestion. A faint laugh escaped him. Real this time. Warm enough to change the atmosphere in the room. He accepted the blanket and settled against the booth. Within minutes, his breathing slowed. Sleep finally claimed him. Claire sat at the counter pretending to organize receipts, but her attention kept drifting back toward him. Outside, the storm gradually weakened. The rain softened. The town grew quiet again. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, Claire glanced toward the booth and found Gabriel already awake. He was not moving, just staring through the front window toward the fading darkness, watching the horizon, waiting for something, or someone. What Claire could not know was that before sunrise, Gabriel's world would come looking for him. And as the first faint hint of dawn touched the edge of the sky, she felt a strange certainty settle over her. Whatever happened next was going to change everything. The sky was turning pale grey when Gabriel stood from the booth and folded the blanket with surprising care. The storm had finally passed, leaving droplets clinging to the restaurant windows like tiny crystals. For a moment, everything felt ordinary again. The coffee machine hummed softly behind the counter. The first delivery truck of the morning rumbled somewhere down Main Street. The world was waking up. You should get some rest, Claire Dawson said. You have been awake almost as long as I have. Gabriel glanced toward the front windows. I will rest later. You keep saying that because it is true. Claire shook her head and carried 2 fresh mugs of coffee to the booth. You are impossible. That is a popular opinion. The faint smile that followed caught her off guard. It changed his entire face, made him look younger somehow, less guarded, less like a man carrying the weight of an invisible war. For a few quiet minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Gabriel suddenly set down his coffee. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. He was looking through the front window again. What is it? Claire asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked toward the glass. Curiosity pulled her after him. The moment she reached the window, her breath caught. Black SUVs were pulling onto Main Street, one after another, smooth, silent, expensive. They moved with deliberate precision, transforming the sleepy small-town road into something that looked 6 of them, maybe more. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Please tell me those are not more old friends. Gabriel exhaled slowly. No, that sounds like good news. It is. The first SUV stopped directly in front of the restaurant, then the second, then the third. Doors opened simultaneously. Men stepped out wearing dark suits despite the early hour. They spread out across the sidewalk with practiced efficiency, not threatening. Organized, every movement looked rehearsed. One man spoke quietly into an earpiece. Another opened the rear passenger door of the lead vehicle. Then everyone seemed to stop moving. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Respect. Expectation. Something close to reverence. A tall, older man stepped from the vehicle. Silver hair, impeccable suit, calm eyes. He scanned the street once before looking directly toward the restaurant window, toward Gabriel. The older man placed a hand over his heart and gave a small nod. Gabriel nodded back. Claire stared at him. Who exactly are you? For a second, Gabriel said nothing. Then he looked at her with an expression that almost resembled resignation. Someone whose life became very complicated a long time ago. The front door opened. The bells above the entrance chimed softly. The older man entered alone and crossed the dining room before stopping a few feet away. "Sir," he said. Relief flooded his voice despite the formal greeting. "It is good to see you standing." Gabriel extended his hand. The older man accepted it immediately. "You found me quickly. Everyone was looking." The older man finally noticed Claire standing beside the counter. His eyes softened. "You must be Miss Dawson." Claire's heart skipped. "How does everybody know my name?" To her surprise, both men looked amused. "Because," the older man said gently, "you helped someone very important." Important, the word echoed in Claire's mind. Not wealthy, not influential. Important. There was a difference. Gabriel turned toward her. "Claire, this is Arthur." Arthur nodded politely. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Claire folded her arms. "I feel like I am the only person in this room who has no idea what is happening." Arthur looked at Gabriel. Gabriel looked at Arthur. Neither seemed eager to explain. "Wonderful," Claire muttered. "That answers everything." A smile tugged briefly at Gabriel's mouth before his expression became serious again. "You deserve the truth, finally. I was beginning to think that might never happen." He took a slow breath. "My full name is Gabriel Romano." The name meant nothing to Claire for approximately 2 seconds, then everything clicked into place. Every newspaper headline, every business article, every rumor she had ever heard. Romano Holdings, Romano Properties, Romano Development Group, one of the largest private business empires on the East Coast. Claire's eyes widened. "You are Gabriel Romano." He nodded once. She stared at him, then at the line of SUVs outside, then back at him. Suddenly the expensive coat, the watch, the men searching for him, the older advisor, all of it made sense. What Claire did not yet realize was that Gabriel Romano's name carried far more weight than any headline could explain. "You own half the city," Gabriel sighed. "That is a dramatic exaggeration." Arthur cleared his throat. "Not by much." Claire blinked. "You slept in my booth." "Technically," Gabriel said. "I borrowed your booth." Despite everything, a laugh escaped her. She could not help it. The absurdity was overwhelming. Less than 12 hours earlier, she had found a stranger in an alley. Now she was apparently standing across from one of the most powerful men in the state. Gabriel watched her carefully. "Are you angry?" "I have not decided yet." "Fair." Morning sunlight finally broke through the clouds outside. Golden light spilled across the restaurant floor. For the first time since Claire had found him behind the building, Gabriel looked completely at ease, safe, surrounded by people who trusted him. Yet when his gaze returned to her, something in his expression changed, more personal. Because while everyone else in his world saw influence, power, and responsibility, Claire Dawson had seen only a tired stranger standing alone in the rain. "Claire," he said quietly, "you saved my life." The words settled heavily between them. "And I am not going to forget that." The restaurant should have felt different after that morning, yet somehow it still smelled like coffee and fresh biscuits. It still had the same worn booths. It still had the same bell above the front door that chimed. The world outside had shifted. Claire Dawson's had not. Or at least that was what she told herself. By noon, the black SUVs were gone. Arthur was gone. Gabriel was gone. The only evidence that any of it had happened was the memory refusing to leave her mind. Claire spent the afternoon serving customers and trying not to think about it. Unfortunately, everyone else seemed determined to make that impossible. Around 3 o'clock, her friend Megan slid into a booth near the register and immediately narrowed her eyes. "You look distracted." "I am working." "You look distracted while working." Claire sighed and poured her coffee. "Thank you for your expert analysis." Megan took a sip and continued staring at her. "What happened?" "Nothing, Claire, nothing unusual." Megan nearly laughed. "That was the least convincing thing you have ever said." Before Claire could answer, the front door opened. For a brief second, several conversations throughout the restaurant seemed to pause. Claire looked up automatically. Gabriel had returned. He was no longer wearing the damp coat from the night before. Instead, he wore a dark charcoal suit that looked as though it belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Clean-shaven, composed, confident. The exhausted stranger from the alley was gone. In his place stood the man whose name appeared in newspapers, business journals, and television interviews. The strange part was that the moment he entered, his attention found Claire immediately, as though he had not noticed anyone else in the room. Megan followed her gaze, then looked back at Claire, then at Gabriel, then back at Claire again. "Claire, do not." "Who is that?" "Do not." "Claire." Claire buried her face in her hands. Gabriel approached the counter with a faint smile. "Good afternoon. You came back. I said I would not forget." Megan looked between them with open fascination. I am going to need details later. Gabriel extended a small paper bag toward Claire. What is this? She asked. A thank you gift. Claire immediately felt her stomach tighten. No, you have not looked inside. Still no. Amusement flickered in Gabriel's eyes. You reject gifts before opening them. I reject gifts from billionaires before opening them. Megan nearly choked on her coffee. Gabriel laughed softly. The sound attracted several curious glances from nearby tables. It is not expensive, he said. Reluctantly, Claire opened the bag. Inside sat a simple ceramic mug, white, plain, hand-painted with a tiny drawing of a coffee cup. She stared at it in confusion. That is it? That is it? Claire turned the mug over. A local artisan's signature was painted on the bottom. You bought me a coffee mug. You gave me coffee. I owe you considerably more than a mug. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Before she could respond, one of her waitresses hurried over. Claire, you need to see this. She held out her phone. A local business website filled the screen. At first, Claire did not understand what she was looking at. Then her eyes widened. Dawson's Grill had been featured prominently on the front page. 5-star reviews. A full article celebrating local family-owned businesses. Professional photographs she had never seen before. What is this? Claire asked. Her waitress grinned. Reservations have doubled since this morning. Claire slowly turned toward Gabriel. No. He raised an innocent eyebrow. No, what? You did something. I support small businesses. Gabriel. Claire, you promised not to buy my restaurant. I did not buy your restaurant. Did you influence this article? He considered the question for exactly 1 second. Possibly. Claire pointed toward the door. Out. Gabriel looked delighted. You are throwing me out? Immediately. Megan was openly laughing now. Several customers looked completely confused. Gabriel placed both hands over his heart in mock surrender. Very well, then his expression softened. I only wanted to help. The honesty behind those words stopped Claire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. What Claire did not realize was that Gabriel Romano had spent years surrounded by people who wanted things from him. Influence, money, opportunities. Claire Dawson remained one of the few people who consistently asked for nothing. I appreciate the thought, she said quietly, but if this place succeeds, I want it to succeed because we earned it. Something changed in Gabriel's eyes. Respect, perhaps even admiration. Understood. He nodded once. Then I will stay out of it. Good. Most, Claire groaned. Gabriel smiled. Then he turned toward the door. Just before leaving, he looked back. For what it is worth, Claire, I think you would have succeeded anyway. The bell chimed as he stepped outside. Sunlight flooded through the glass behind him. Claire watched him disappear down the sidewalk, and despite everything she had learned about Gabriel Romano, despite the secrets, the powerful name, the men searching for him, and the enormous distance between their worlds, she found herself smiling after he was gone. That realization was far more dangerous than anything that had happened the night before. For the next 2 weeks, Gabriel Romano did exactly what he promised. Mostly. He did not show up every day. He did not send gifts. He did not buy buildings, influence reporters, or arrive with a parade of black SUVs. Instead, he became something far more difficult for Claire Dawson to ignore. He became a quiet presence at the edge of her life. Sometimes Claire would glance through the restaurant window and notice a familiar black sedan parked across the street. Not close enough to attract attention, not obvious enough to invite questions. Just there. Other times, she would be walking home after closing and notice a police cruiser slowly passing through the neighborhood for the 3rd time that night. Once could be coincidence. 3 times was not. The strangest part was that Gabriel never mentioned any of it. Neither did Claire. They simply pretended the invisible safety net surrounding her did not exist. Business at Dawson's Grill continued improving. The article had brought new customers from neighboring towns, and for the first time in years, Claire was no longer calculating every expense down to the last dollar. One Friday afternoon, she was carrying a box of produce through the back entrance when she nearly collided with a delivery driver. Sorry, Claire said automatically. My fault. The man smiled. No problem. Then he handed her a clipped sign here. Claire glanced at the paperwork. This is not for us. It says Dawson's Grill. She looked closer. Her name was clearly printed at the top. What exactly is it? The driver pointed toward the truck. Curious. Claire stepped outside. Her jaw dropped. Brand new commercial kitchen equipment filled the back of the vehicle. Industrial mixers, stainless steel prep tables, upgraded refrigeration units. Equipment worth more than her truck. There has to be a mistake, she said. The driver checked the invoice. Paid in full. He shrugged. I just deliver things. Claire did not even need to guess. 30 minutes later, she was standing inside the lobby of Romano Development Group headquarters. The building rose 40 stories above downtown like a monument to glass and steel. Everything inside looked expensive enough to make her nervous. The receptionist smiled politely. "Miss Dawson, Mr. Romano is expecting you." Of course he was. Claire stepped into a private elevator and tried to calm her growing irritation. By the time the doors opened on the top floor, she had prepared an entire speech. It vanished the moment she entered Gabriel's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Sunlight reflected from distant skyscrapers. The room was elegant without being flamboyant, very much like the man who occupied it. Gabriel looked up from a meeting table. "Claire, no." He blinked. "No?" "Absolutely not." A slow smile appeared. "Good afternoon to you too." Claire marched across the room. "Do not me." Several executives seated nearby suddenly became very interested in their laptops. Gabriel stood. "Everyone, give us a moment." Within seconds, the room emptied. The door closed behind the last person. "You said you would stop helping," Claire said. "I said I would mostly stop helping. That is not the same thing." "Apparently not." Claire folded her arms. "Why do you keep doing this?" The smile disappeared from Gabriel's face. His answer came quietly. "Because every time I think about that night, I remember how easily you could have walked away." The sincerity caught her off guard. "Gabriel, most people would have." He stepped closer to the window. "You did not expect anything in return. You simply helped." The city stretched behind him beneath the afternoon sunlight. For the first time in days, Gabriel looked tired again, not physically, emotionally. "That is rare," he said. Some of Claire's frustration faded. "You still cannot buy me industrial refrigerators." Noted. "I am serious. So am I." They stared at each other for several seconds before Gabriel finally nodded. "The equipment will be returned." Relief flooded through Claire. "Thank you. You are welcome." Then a strange expression crossed his face, something thoughtful, almost distracted. His attention shifted toward the street below. Instinctively, Claire followed his gaze. A black SUV sat parked across from the building. Nothing unusual about that, except Gabriel's expression had changed completely. The warmth vanished. The ease disappeared. Every protective wall returned at once. Claire immediately noticed the difference. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Gabriel remained silent for a moment. Far below, traffic continued moving through downtown as if nothing had changed. But Gabriel knew better. For days, reports had been arriving. Questions, quiet inquiries, interest where there should have been none. None of it had concerned him as much as it should have, until Claire's name began appearing in those conversations. Finally, he turned toward her. The concern in his eyes felt genuine, immediate, personal. "Someone has been asking questions about you." A chill slid through Claire. "What kind of questions?" Gabriel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "The kind that make me very uncomfortable." The room suddenly felt colder, and for the first time since the stormy night behind Dawson's Grill, Claire realized the danger surrounding Gabriel Romano might not have disappeared at all. It might simply have been waiting. The drive back to town felt longer than usual. Gabriel insisted on sending a car, and after 10 minutes of arguing, Claire Dawson accepted only because refusing would have meant standing on a downtown sidewalk for another hour searching for transportation. Even then, the warning remained with her. Someone had been asking questions about her. Not about the restaurant, not about business, about her. By the time Claire arrived home, the late afternoon sun had begun sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Normally, the view calmed her. That evening, it only gave her more time to think. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and immediately checked the windows. Then she laughed at herself. 2 weeks earlier, she had been worried about utility bills and restaurant inventory. Now she was inspecting her own house like a character in a suspense movie. Gabriel Romano was clearly having a terrible influence on her. Still, she checked every room. Everything looked normal. Everything was normal. At least that was what she tried to believe. The next morning, business at Dawson's Grill exploded. The breakfast rush started at 7 and never slowed. Tourists from neighboring counties arrived because of the article. Families filled booths. The wait staff could barely keep up. By noon, every table was occupied. Claire should have been thrilled. Instead, part of her attention kept drifting toward the windows, watching, looking, expecting. Around 1 o'clock, Megan cornered her near the kitchen. "You are distracted again. Apparently that is my permanent condition now. This has something to do with Mr. Billionaire. Does it not?" Claire rolled her eyes. "He has a name." Megan's grin widened instantly. "Interesting response. Do not start. You said he has a name instead of denying it. Before Claire could defend herself, a customer approached the register asking for directions. The interruption saved her. Barely. The afternoon passed in a blur of orders and conversations. It was nearly 6 when Claire finally stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The evening carried the scent of rain, even though the sky remained clear. Main Street bustled with activity. People moved between shops. Children, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Then Claire noticed the man across the street. He stood near a bookstore window pretending to study the display. Mid-30s. Baseball cap. Grey jacket. Nothing remarkable about him, except he had been standing there for nearly 20 minutes, watching the restaurant. The moment their eyes met, he looked away. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was imagining things because of Gabriel's warning. But when she returned inside, she could not shake the feeling. 30 minutes later, she checked again. The man was still there, watching. The uneasiness followed her throughout the evening. By closing time, Claire had almost convinced herself she was being ridiculous. It was a small town. People stood on sidewalks all the time. Not every stranger was a threat. Not every coincidence meant something. She locked the front door and began stacking chairs. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Are you?" Stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. "Do not be alarmed. It is Gabriel." Relief mixed instantly with irritation. She typed back, "How did you get this number?" The reply arrived immediately. "Arthur." That explained absolutely nothing. Before Claire could respond, a third message appeared. "Please tell me the man outside left." Every muscle in her body froze. She moved toward the front window and looked through the blinds. The sidewalk across the street was empty now. The man was gone. Claire's heartbeat quickened. "How do you know about him?" Several seconds passed before Gabriel replied. "Because he works for my cousin." The words seemed to drain all warmth from the room. Cousin? Until that moment, Claire had assumed the danger surrounding Gabriel came from competitors or strangers. People disconnected from him. The idea that it involved family somehow felt worse. Her phone rang before she could respond. Gabriel's name appeared on the screen. She answered immediately. "Tell me what is going on." Silence lingered for a moment. Then his voice came through the speaker. Low, controlled, tired. "There are things I should have told you sooner." Claire sat down in the nearest booth. "Such as?" Another pause. "The person looking for me that night was never the real through her." Outside, the last light of day faded from Main Street. The restaurant stood quiet and empty around her. "Then who is?" Claire asked. Gabriel exhaled slowly. The sound carried a weight she had never heard before. Miles away, Gabriel Romano stood alone in his office overlooking the city, staring through dark glass at lights beginning to appear across the skyline. This was the conversation he had hoped to avoid. Not because he feared what Claire would think of him, because he feared what his world might do to her. "My cousin, Adrian Romano," he finally said. The name meant nothing to Claire. The way Gabriel said it meant everything. What did he do? More silence followed. Then came the answer that changed everything. "He wants my company, and he believes you are the easiest way to reach me." For a long moment, Claire Dawson simply sat there staring at the darkened restaurant while Gabriel's words echoed through her mind. "He wants my company. He believes you are the easiest way to reach me." Outside, Main Street had gone quiet. Most of the shops were closed. Street lamps cast long shadows across the empty sidewalks. Everything looked peaceful, normal. Yet suddenly, nothing felt normal anymore. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" Claire asked quietly. Gabriel remained silent for a moment. "Because I hoped it would never involve you. That plan seems to have failed." A faint sigh came through the phone. "Yes." Claire rubbed her forehead. "What exactly does your cousin want? Control?" The answer came immediately. "He believes the company should belong to him." "And you disagree, strongly." The understatement almost made her laugh. "Almost the man outside," Claire said. "He was working for Adrian?" "Yes." "Was he dangerous?" Another pause followed. "Not personally, but I do not like why he was there." Claire glanced toward the windows again. "What happens now? Now I make sure you are protected." The certainty in Gabriel's voice should have reassured her. Instead, it made her nervous. "Gabriel." "What?" "I am not moving into a fortress." "I was not going to suggest that. You were thinking about it. Maybe a little." Despite everything, Claire smiled. The tension eased slightly, only slightly. They spoke for another 20 minutes before finally ending the call. By the time Claire locked the restaurant and drove home, the night felt heavier than usual. She checked her mirrors more often. Not because she believed someone was following her, because now she knew someone might want to. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. Gabriel called every evening. Sometimes the conversations lasted 5 minutes, sometimes an hour. They talked about everything except Adrian: business, food, childhood memories, strange customers who visited the restaurant. The longer they talked, the easier it became. One Thursday afternoon, Claire found herself laughing at something Gabriel said while unloading inventory. The realization startled her. Somewhere between the storm and the phone calls, Gabriel Romano had become important to her. That should have worried her more than it did. Friday arrived with clear skies and unusually warm weather. Dawson's Grill remained packed from breakfast until dinner. Every table stayed full. Every employee looked exhausted. By closing time, Claire felt ready to collapse. Megan was helping count receipts when a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Both women jumped. "What was that?" Megan asked. Claire hurried toward the back. One of the storage shelves had partially collapsed. Several boxes lay scattered across the floor. Nothing serious. Nothing dangerous. Just a mess. "Relief Flam," she called. Megan appeared beside her. "That shelf has been leaning for months." "I know." Together they spent the next half hour cleaning the storage room. The delay pushed closing even later than usual. By the time everything was finished, the restaurant was completely empty. Megan left first. Claire stayed behind to lock up. The silence felt almost comforting after such a busy day. Then her phone rang. "Gabriel, you are still at work." It was not a question. Claire smiled faintly. "How do you know that?" "Because I know your schedule." "That sounds suspicious." "It is concern." Before Gabriel could say anything else, a strange smell drifted through the air, faint at first, then stronger. Claire's smile disappeared. "Claire?" Gabriel asked. "Hold on." She walked toward the kitchen. The smell grew more noticeable, not smoke exactly, more like something electrical, something overheated. Her pulse quickened. Claire pushed through the swinging kitchen doors. A flicker of orange light reflected against the stainless steel counters. Her stomach dropped instantly. "Claire?" Gabriel's voice sounded sharper now. "There is a problem." Claire moved quickly toward the back prep area. A small section near one of the old electrical panels was sparking. Tiny flashes, nothing huge, but enough to send adrenaline racing through her system. "Get out of there," Gabriel said immediately. "I am calling emergency services." Claire did not argue. The lessons her father had taught her years ago came rushing back. Small problems became large problems when people hesitated. She grabbed her keys and headed toward the rear exit. The smell intensified. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Outside, the evening air felt cool against her face. She stepped into the alley just as distant sirens began echoing somewhere across town. Relief started settling in. Then headlights turned into the alley entrance. A black SUV rolled slowly to a stop. The engine remained running. Claire's pulse froze. Passenger door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, well-dressed, confident. He smiled when he saw her, not a friendly smile, not a threatening one either, just the smile of someone who already knew exactly who she was. "Miss Dawson," he said calmly, "I have been hoping we might finally meet." Claire felt an immediate chill. She had never seen him before. Yet somehow she knew this was not a coincidence. Miles away, Gabriel Romano was already moving toward his car after receiving the emergency call. The moment he heard about the electrical issue, one name had entered his mind: Adrian, and standing alone in the alley beside her restaurant, Claire Dawson suddenly realized she already knew exactly who the stranger in front of her had to be. The man looked nothing like Claire Dawson expected. For days, Adrian Romano had existed only as a name attached to warnings and uneasy conversations. In her imagination, he had become larger than life, intimidating, ruthless, dangerous. Instead, the man standing a few yards away looked calm and perfectly composed. Dark suit, neatly styled hair, the kind of person who could walk into a boardroom and immediately take control of the conversation. His smile never wavered. "Miss Dawson," he said again. Behind him, the SUV idled quietly. The restaurant stood at Claire's back. Somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens were growing louder. "You are Adrian Romano," Claire said. It was not a question. His smile widened slightly. "I am pleased Gabriel at least mentioned me, not in a flattering way." That earned a soft laugh. "I suspected as much." Claire's phone was still pressed against her ear. Gabriel had heard everything. "Claire," his voice said sharply, "go inside." Adrian's eyes flickered toward the phone. "Ah, Gabriel is listening." "What do you want?" Claire asked. Adrian folded his hands in front of him. "A conversation. That is hard to believe. Fair enough." He glanced briefly toward the building. "I heard about the electrical issue. I hope everyone is safe." The timing felt far too convenient. Claire's suspicion must have shown because Adrian immediately shook his head. "No, Claire, I had nothing to do with that. You expect me to believe you?" Actually, the honesty caught her off guard. Adrian seemed strangely unconcerned with being liked. "Then why are you here?" Adrian looked directly at her. "Because you are important to my cousin." The words landed heavily. Claire felt her pulse quicken. "No, but I know Gabriel." For the first time, some of Adrian's confidence faded, not entirely, just enough to reveal something more complicated underneath. "My cousin does not trust easily," he said quietly. "He certainly does not care easily." Claire did not know how to respond. Through the phone, Gabriel remained silent. Listening, Adrian continued. "You should know something, Claire. Whatever Gabriel has told you about me, there is another side to the story. There always is." "Exactly." Headlights suddenly flashed at the alley entrance. Another vehicle turned in, then another. The moment Claire saw the black SUV's Adrian's side, and there it is. Doors opened. Several men stepped out, not rushing, not creating a scene, simply moving with purpose. Gabriel emerged from the rear passenger seat of the lead vehicle before it had fully stopped. The second Claire saw him, something inside her relaxed. The realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Gabriel crossed the alley without taking his eyes off Adrian. "You should leave." Adrian smiled faintly. "Hello to you too. Leave. I came to talk. You came to make a point." For several seconds, the two cousins stared at each other. The resemblance was obvious now. Similar features, similar confidence, yet the differences felt even more noticeable. Adrian carried himself like a strategist. Gabriel carried himself like someone accustomed to responsibility. Years earlier, they had stood on the same side of every argument. Neither man seemed capable of forgetting how far apart they had become. Eventually, Adrian looked away first. His attention shifted back toward Claire. "Be careful, Claire." Gabriel's expression darkened instantly. Adrian raised one hand. "Not a threat." He sounded almost offended by the suggestion. "Advice." "I do not need your advice," Claire said. "Probably not." Adrian stepped backward toward the waiting SUV. "Still, I hope things work out better for you than they did for the rest of us." Before Claire could ask what that meant, he climbed into the vehicle. Seconds later, the SUV disappeared from the alley. Silence settled over the space he left behind. The distant sirens finally arrived. Emergency crews pulled into the parking lot and immediately focused on the restaurant. The electrical problem had already been contained. No major damage, no injuries. Relief spread through Claire so quickly it almost left her dizzy. "Claire." She turned toward Gabriel. The concern in his eyes was impossible to miss. "Are you all right?" "I think so." Gabriel studied her carefully, as if verifying the answer for himself. "Did he say anything else?" "Nothing that made sense." Gabriel nodded slowly. To Claire's surprise, he suddenly looked exhausted, emotionally, like the encounter had reopened wounds that had never fully healed. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "Dinner." Claire blinked. "Dinner? You have been working for 14 hours. That is not an answer." "It is spite everything," she laughed. The tension finally began to ease. Gabriel's expression softened. "Please." It was such a simple word. Yet somehow it felt more sincere than any grand gesture ever could. Claire looked toward the restaurant, at the fading evening sky, then back at Gabriel. "Fine," she said. "Dinner." For the first time that night, a genuine smile appeared on Gabriel Romano's face, and although Claire could not fully explain why, seeing it felt safer than anything else in the world. The restaurant was still surrounded by flashing emergency lights when Claire Dawson climbed into Gabriel's car. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. City lights drifted past the windows while soft music played quietly in the background. Claire should have felt overwhelmed. The evening had been one strange event after another. Instead, she felt oddly calm, maybe because Gabriel was beside her, maybe because she was too exhausted to process anything else. The car eventually stopped in front of a small restaurant overlooking the river, not one of the extravagant places Claire expected someone like Gabriel to choose. It looked quiet, comfortable, almost hidden. "You come here often?" Claire asked as they stepped inside. "Whenever I want to be treated like a normal person." "Does that happen often?" Gabriel smiled. "Not as often as I would like." They were seated near a window overlooking the water. The river reflected hundreds of lights from nearby buildings, turning the dark surface into liquid gold. For a while, they talked about ordinary things, food, travel, childhood memories. It was surprisingly easy, easier than it should have been. Shifted. "What did Adrian mean?" Claire asked quietly. Gabriel's expression changed immediately. "About what?" "When he said he hoped things turned out better for me than they did for the rest of you." The warmth in Gabriel's eyes faded. He looked out at the river for several seconds before answering. "My family was not always what it is now." Meaning, he exhaled slowly. When I was younger, the company was smaller. We were closer. At least I thought we were. Claire listened without interrupting. My father built everything from nothing, Gabriel continued. He worked every day of his life. He believed family mattered more than money, more than power, more than anything. A faint smile appeared, sad this time. I believed him. Something in his voice made Claire's chest tighten. What happened? Gabriel lowered his eyes toward the table. Success happened. The answer sounded simple. The emotion behind it was not. The larger the company became, the more people wanted control of it. Arguments turned into divisions. He shook his head slightly. Eventually everyone chose sides, including Adrian, especially Adrian. The waiter arrived with dinner, creating a brief interruption. Neither spoke until they were alone again. Were you always rivals? Claire asked. Gabriel surprised her by laughing softly. No, he stared at his coffee. When we were children, Adrian was my best friend. Claire blinked. That was not the answer she expected. Really, every summer. His gaze drifted toward the river again. Fishing, baseball, family vacations, we did everything together. For the first time since Claire had met him, Gabriel looked less like a powerful executive and more like someone remembering a life he missed. Then what changed? His expression grew distant. People grow up. Ambition changes people. Silence settled between them. Claire could feel the weight of memories he rarely shared. You still care about him, she said quietly. Gabriel did not answer immediately. Finally, he nodded. That is the problem. The honesty in those words struck Claire harder than she expected. Most people spoke about conflicts as if they existed between enemies. Gabriel spoke about Adrian like someone grieving a loss that had never fully happened. I spent years believing I could fix things, he admitted. Years trying to convince myself that eventually we would find our way back. And now? A long pause followed. Gabriel looked toward the river, toward reflections shifting across the dark water, toward a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. Now I am not sure. The vulnerability in his voice surprised Claire. This was the man everyone described as unstoppable, unshakable. Yet sitting across from her he looked tired, not because of business, because of disappointment, because of family. Without thinking, Claire reached across the table and touched his hand. The gesture lasted only a second. Simple, human. Yet Gabriel froze. His eyes lifted to hers. For a moment neither of them moved. Neither spoke. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background. There was only the river outside the window and the quiet understanding passing between them. Gabriel had spent years surrounded by negotiations, expectations, and carefully calculated conversations. Very few moments in his life felt genuine anymore. This one did. Then he smiled small, genuine. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For reminding me that not everyone wants something from me. Claire felt her heart skip. The sincerity in his voice made looking away impossible. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the water while the evening settled peacefully around them, and in that moment Claire realized something that should have frightened her. Somewhere between the storm, the phone calls, the arguments, and the laughter, Gabriel Romano had become far more than a stranger she once helped, and judging by the way he was looking at her, she was no longer simply someone he felt obligated to protect. The days after dinner by the river felt different. Not dramatically, not all at once. Dawson's Grill still opened at 6 every morning. Customers still complained about parking. Megan still asked intrusive questions about Claire Dawson's personal life. Yet something had changed beneath the surface. Every phone call from Gabriel felt less like an obligation and more like part of her day. Every message made her smile before she even realized it. The strange part was that neither of them mentioned it. They simply continued moving closer without naming what was happening. 2 weeks passed that way, peaceful, almost normal, which should have warned Claire that something was coming. Trouble rarely announced itself. It waited until people relaxed. The call arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire was helping a customer carry takeout bags when her phone buzzed. Arthur, that alone was unusual. Arthur never called directly. Claire, he said the second she answered. His normally calm voice sounded strained. Where are you? Claire's stomach tightened immediately. At the restaurant. Why? Silence then. Stay there, Arthur. Gabriel is on his way. Every alarm in Claire's mind activated at once. What happened? Another pause. There has been a development. Claire hated that phrase. Important people always seemed to use vague language when the truth was bad. Arthur. His voice softened. Just stay inside, Claire. The line disconnected. For the next 20 minutes, Claire accomplished absolutely nothing. She tried working, failed. Tried focusing on inventory, failed again. Every passing minute tightened the knot in her stomach. When the familiar black SUV finally appeared outside, she was already waiting near the front window. Gabriel entered immediately. One look at his face told her everything. Something was wrong, very wrong. Tell me. He did not sit down, did not smile, did not pretend things were fine. Adrian called a special board meeting. Claire blinked. That is the emergency? He is trying to remove me. The words landed harder than she expected. Can he do that? Gabriel exhaled slowly. If enough people support him. Suddenly the business empire felt less like a company and more like a family tearing itself apart. Why now? Claire asked. Gabriel's expression darkened. Because he believes I am distracted. The implication hung silently between them, distracted by her. Before either of them could address it, the front door opened again. Arthur entered carrying a folder. His face looked grim. We have confirmation. Gabriel took the folder. Several pages filled with reports and financial statements sat inside. Claire could not understand most of it, but she did not need to. Gabriel's reaction said enough. How many? He asked quietly. 8 board members. Claire felt her heart sink. Arthur looked exhausted. For a moment nobody spoke. The restaurant suddenly felt far too small for the weight of the conversation taking place inside it. Finally, Claire broke the silence. What happens if he wins? Gabriel looked directly at her. I lose everything I spent my life building. The honesty in his answer hurt more than any dramatic speech could have. Not because of the company. Because Claire could see what it truly meant to him. His father's legacy. His family's history. The years he had dedicated to protecting it. Arthur eventually left to prepare for the meeting. Customers continued coming and going, completely unaware that one of the most powerful companies on the East Coast was fighting for its future. Gabriel remained behind. They sat together in Claire's office long after closing. Neither of them had much appetite for dinner. Around 9 o'clock, Gabriel finally spoke. If this gets worse, I need you to promise me something. Claire immediately disliked where the conversation was heading. No, a faint smile appeared. You do not even know what I was going to ask. I know enough. Claire, no. The smile vanished. Please. Claire folded her arms. Fine. Gabriel leaned forward. His green eyes held hers. Serious, steady, honest. If Adrian escalates this situation, I need you to leave town for a few days. Absolutely not. Claire, no, I am serious. So am I. Frustration flickered across Gabriel's face. Why are you so stubborn? Because I care about you. The words escaped before Claire could stop them. Her heart nearly stopped. Gabriel stared at her. Claire stared right back. Neither moved, neither looked away. Then something softened in his expression. Something vulnerable, something real. Claire, he said quietly. Hearing her name spoken that way changed everything. The distance they had both carefully maintained finally disappeared. Gabriel had spent weeks trying to convince himself that protecting Claire was simply the right thing to do, a responsibility, a debt he owed. Deep down, he had known the truth long before that moment. I was terrified the night I found out Adrian's people were watching you. His voice grew lower, not because of the company, not because of the board, because I realized losing you would hurt more than losing any of it. Claire felt her breath catch. For a moment, the entire world seemed to narrow until only Gabriel existed. The restaurant, the company, the conflict. Everything else faded away. There was only the truth hanging between them, and for the first time since the stormy night behind Dawson's Grill, neither of them tried to hide from it. For several seconds after Gabriel spoke, neither of them moved. The restaurant felt impossibly quiet. The old clock on the office wall ticked softly. Somewhere beyond the window, a truck rolled down Main Street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Gabriel's gaze never left Claire Dawson's. There was no hesitation in his expression, no uncertainty. Just truth, the kind people spent years trying to avoid. Claire swallowed hard. You should have told me sooner. A faint smile touched Gabriel's face. I know, it would have saved both of us a lot of confusion. Probably. The smile faded. But I was trying to do the responsible thing. And how did that work out? For the first time all evening, Gabriel laughed. A genuine laugh, warm and unguarded. Not very well. Claire found herself smiling too. Then reality returned, the board meeting, Adrian, the company, everything waiting outside that small office. What happens now? She asked quietly. Gabriel leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow decides a great deal. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Claire barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself thinking about everything that had happened since the stormy night behind Dawson's Grill. By 7 o'clock, she was already serving coffee to customers while checking her phone every few minutes. The board meeting began at 9. At 9:15, no message. At 10, nothing. By 11, her nerves were completely gone. Megan finally grabbed her shoulders. If you look at your phone one more time, I am taking it away. You are a terrible friend. I am an excellent friend. Around noon, Claire's phone finally rang. Gabriel, she answered immediately. What happened? Silence greeted her for a moment, then his voice arrived. Calm, controlled, different. Can you meet me? Claire's stomach dropped. Gabriel, please. 20 minutes later, she was walking into Romano headquarters. The atmosphere felt different from her previous visit. Employees moved through the lobby, speaking in hushed voices. Some looked relieved, others looked stunned. The elevator carried her to the top floor. When the doors opened, Arthur was waiting. For the first time since Claire had met him, he looked genuinely happy. Claire. Arthur, he is in his office. Claire felt her pulse quicken. What happened? Arthur smiled. Go ask him yourself. She found Gabriel standing beside the massive windows overlooking the city. Sunlight poured across the room. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass. He turned when she entered, and immediately Claire knew. The tension that had followed him for months was gone. You won. A slow smile appeared. We won. Relief hit Claire so hard she nearly laughed. How? Gabriel walked toward her. The board reviewed information Adrian never expected them to see. What kind of information? Evidence. His expression remained calm. Nothing criminal. Nothing dramatic. Just proof that several people around him had manipulated company decisions for personal gain. Claire blinked. That sounds dramatic. Fair point. What happened to Adrian? The smile disappeared. Gabriel looked toward the city again. He resigned. The answer surprised her. That is enough. He grew quiet for a moment. I could have pushed further. Claire understood immediately what he meant. But you did not. He shook his head. No, why? Gabriel looked directly at her. Because you were right. About what? Not everything needs to end with someone losing. The words settled between them. Months earlier, Claire would never have imagined Gabriel saying something like that. The realization made her chest ache in the best possible way. She had changed him, not by force, not by persuasion, simply by showing him another way to see the world. So what now? Claire asked. Everyone keeps asking me that, and for the first time in years, I have an answer. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. Close enough that Claire could see every shade of green in his eyes, close enough that neither of them had any reason to pretend anymore. Now I stop spending my life protecting a company. Claire felt her heart begin to race. Gabriel, now I start building a future. Emotion tightened her throat. The city shimmered beyond the windows. Sunlight reflected from distant buildings. Everything felt strangely bright, hopeful, peaceful. Gabriel reached into his jacket pocket. Claire's breath caught in expression. Relax, that is impossible. His laugh returned, then he pulled out a small velvet box. Suddenly breathing became much more difficult. Gabriel Romano had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation, yet nothing in his life had ever felt more important than this moment. Claire Dawson, he said softly, the best thing that ever happened to me began in an alley behind a restaurant. Tears filled Claire's eyes before she could stop them. Gabriel, you saw a stranger and chose kindness. His voice grew quieter, more emotional. Every good thing that followed started because of that choice. The box opened. I do not want another day of my life without you in it. Sunlight filled the room around them. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. And as Claire looked into Gabriel's eyes, she realized she had known her answer for a very long time. For a moment, the entire world disappeared. The city beyond the windows, the company, the months of uncertainty. Everything faded until only Gabriel remained, standing in front of Claire Dawson, holding a small velvet box. Looking at her with more honesty than she had ever seen in another human being, tears blurred Claire's vision. She laughed through them anyway. You know, she said softly, most proposals do not begin with a story about an alley. Gabriel smiled. Most proposals did not start there. That was true, more true than either of them could explain. Claire looked at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. Her answer had existed long before the question, yes. The word left her mouth before another thought could interfere. Gabriel closed his eyes briefly as if absorbing the reality of it. Relief, happiness, gratitude. Every emotion crossed his face at once. When he opened the box completely, sunlight caught the ring and scattered tiny reflections across the room. Claire held out her hand. Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit. How did you know my size? Claire asked. I have resources. Claire laughed. Of course you do. The months that followed passed faster than either of them expected. Life did not magically become simple. Life never worked that way. There were still responsibilities, long work days, endless wedding decisions, arguments about seating charts. More than one disagreement about how many flowers any reasonable ceremony actually required. Through all of it, Gabriel remained exactly who he had become since the night they met, protective without being controlling, strong without needing to prove it, and surprisingly funny whenever he forgot to be serious. The company changed too. With Adrian gone, Gabriel restructured several divisions and expanded community investment projects throughout the state, new scholarships, small business grants, local development programs. Headlines praised his leadership. The truth was much simpler. He had finally stopped building an empire and started building a legacy. 1 year later, the wedding took place on a quiet stretch of coastline just after sunrise. No extravagant spectacle. No television cameras, no celebrity guests, just family friends, people who mattered. The ocean sparkled beneath the morning light. Gentle waves rolled onto the shore. White chairs lined the sand. Somewhere behind Claire, Megan was already crying before the ceremony even started. "You are making a scene," Claire whispered. "I am celebrating love," Megan whispered back dramatically. "You are crying on strangers." "That is also true." Claire laughed and turned toward the aisle. Then she saw Gabriel waiting near the water. Every sound seemed to disappear. The ocean, the guests, the wind, everything faded. He looked exactly like the man who had walked into her restaurant after the storm, and completely different. There was peace in him now, a quiet certainty that had not existed before. When Claire reached him, Gabriel's eyes never left hers, not for a second. The ceremony itself felt like a blur of emotions, promises, laughter, tears. The kind of memories that became impossible to separate from the feeling surrounding them. What Claire remembered most was the expression on Gabriel's face when they were pronounced husband and wife. Not triumph, not relief. Gratitude, pure and simple, as though he still could not quite believe any of it was real. 2 years later, Dawson's Grill expanded into a second location, then a third. Claire remained involved in every detail, every menu item, every recipe, every decision. Gabriel invested when she asked and stayed out of the way when she told him to, mostly. Some habits never disappeared completely. Arthur eventually retired and spent his days fishing in Florida. Megan became the unofficial family historian and somehow acquired thousands of wedding photographs nobody remembered taking. Even Adrian found peace. Time softened old wounds. Conversations gradually replaced conflict. Distance became understanding. Not every relationship returned to what it once was, but healing happened anyway. The best surprise arrived on a warm spring morning several years later. Gabriel stood in the nursery holding their newborn daughter while sunlight streamed through the windows. The room was quiet except for the soft creak of a rocking chair. Claire watched him stare down at the baby's tiny face with complete wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Gabriel's smile appeared instantly. "I am thinking she already has your stubbornness. That is rich coming from you." He laughed softly. Then his expression grew thoughtful. "Do you remember the storm?" "Of course. I almost did not walk behind that restaurant." Claire felt her chest tighten. "But you did." He nodded. Their daughter wrapped her tiny fingers around one of his, instantly, effortlessly, as though she had known him forever. Gabriel looked at her, then at Claire. "Best decision I ever made." Years earlier, Claire Dawson had found a stranger sitting alone in the rain. A man carrying burdens he never expected to set down. She thought she was offering coffee, a towel, a few hours of kindness. Instead, she had opened a door neither of them knew existed. Looking back, life seemed almost funny that way. The moments that changed everything rarely announced themselves. They arrived quietly, hidden inside ordinary choices. A conversation, a helping hand, a single act of kindness on a stormy night. Gabriel once told Claire that she had saved his life. The truth was that they had saved each other, and with every passing year, every shared challenge, every ordinary morning spent together, that truth only became clearer. The storm that brought them together was long gone. But the life they built afterward remained, bright, steady, and stronger than either of them had ever imagined.